regions of southwestern Sichuan province in the past few days. Soldiers have been sent out from the Chengdu military region, one of 7 military commands in China, along with members of the paramilitary's People's Armed Police. Their numbers could amount to as much as 2 divisions, as many as 20,000 men. But such numbers could not be confirmed in a country in which all military movements are a state secret. The troops have been permitted to carry loaded weapons, a rare and extreme measure for soldiers operating within China's national borders, local sources have said. Quote, end quote. We know, Mr. Hu, your policies are to conduct more unwarranted arrests based on pure suspicion and fear. As you know very well, this year marks the 50th anniversary of the first national uprising in Tibet on March 10, 1959. According to a Reuters article yesterday, your government, Mr. Hu, plans to use the 50th anniversary to, and I quote here, to argue that its spending, schools, and religious policies have done far more for Tibetans than the Dalai Lama and his calls for full regional autonomy, end quote, have done. Here's a challenge for you, Mr. Hu. Can you try to prove that without a single shot of a gun at a peaceful Tibetan protester? Can you try to prove that without arrests that are unwarranted? Can you do that without dictating policies that strip basic human rights of Tibetans? And most importantly, if you are so confident of your argument, can we hear that from the grassroots Tibetans inside Tibet, rather than from your puppet leadership in the Tibetan plateau? If, indeed, you have done more for Tibetans, why then, I ask you, Mr. Hu, are you and your policies the target of all past, present, and future protests inside Tibet? Let's talk about the so-called democratic reform and self-emancipation of Tibet that your government is imposing on Tibetans inside Tibet. Have you ever wondered why, after 50 years of so-called liberation, emancipation, democratic reform, and developments, hundreds of Tibetans all over the Tibetan plateau took to the streets over 30 cities around the plateau last March to voice their dissent of your government's repressive policies? Or have you even stopped to think why 37,000 low-income Tibetan families are rejecting the $120 each that is being doled out to them by your subordinates to buy Chinese firecrackers for Tibetan New Year this year? Or why further attempts to tempt the 2.8 million Tibetans with marathon television performances going on for 4 hours, trying to show happy Tibetans living in so-called, quote-unquote, normal life, has fallen on deaf ears? If there truly is democratic reform, as you say, Mr. Hu, in Tibet, can you tell me why a 30-year-old Tibetan monk in Lithang and 21 other Tibetans were detained and some badly beaten when they shouted, "No Losar" this year? What kind of democratic reform are you referring to when your government dictates what Tibetans can and cannot celebrate or wear on their bodies? What kind of democratic reform are you referring to where your government mandates what goes on within the walls of a Tibetan home or monastery? What kind of democracy are you referring to where Tibetans on the Tibetan plateau risk arrest, torture, and sometimes death for having a picture of the Dalai Lama on their shrines, or where they have to denounce the Dalai Lama? You know that that is like commanding a Catholic to denounce the Pope, or a Muslim to denounce Prophet Muhammad. Where is the democracy, I ask you, Mr. Hu, in being jumped by plainclothes public security officers at the mere slogan, "Long live the Dalai Lama," chanted by Tibetans inside Tibet? And finally, Mr. Hu, if in 50 years your leadership has failed miserably in creating democratic reform inside Tibet, looks to me like it is your leadership that really needs the democratic reform and emancipation first. As India's Mahatma Gandhi once said, "Be the change you want to see." So, Premier Hu Jintao and leaders of China, if you genuinely desire a democratic reform in Tibet, then let us see genuine democracy that honors the rights of the people, in this case, Tibetans inside Tibet, to determine the future of Tibet. That would be the step in the right direction, Mr. Hu, a step China's leadership has still not learned to take in 50 years. Think about that. As your own leader Mao once said, and I quote him, "Weapons are an important factor in war, but not the decisive factor. It is people, not things, that are decisive. The contest of strength is not only a contest of military and economic power, but also the contest of human power and morale. Long live the Dalai Lama! Pegelo! Free Tibet!
Most festive occasion in a year for Tibetans, that's Tibetan New Year. Because the Chinese armed forces have killed so many Tibetans last year, more than 200. And we even do not have any information about thousands of Tibetans who have been missing. They may be languishing in prison or at the war, they have even died. We have no information about that. That's why we wanted to mourn for them. We wanted to remember their cause, their sacrifice for the noble cause of Tibet. This is a tradition, as we know, that in Tibetan civilized society, a member of your family dies. That family would not celebrate Losar for 1 year. Even we have a proverb in Tibetan, we say that if your neighbor cow or bull dies, you would mourn for 3 days. That's kind of civilized people, civilized tradition that Tibetan people have, who always think about others. But the Chinese government always call us barbarians.
Solidarity with the people of Tibet, who are brothers and sisters. We're gathered here today. The sole reason is that we're not going to celebrate this year's Losar. This year's Losar marks the 50th year since the March uprising of 1959, and 60 years since the Chinese government, and also we are here to mourn the lives of people lost during the 2009 January Strike Hard campaign that the Chinese government propagated. Just in 3 days, in January this year, 5,766 people were rounded up and arbitrarily arrested. We do not know how many people have died, and we do not know how many people are still being killed in prisons. Since March 2000, over 6,000 Tibetan people
大家老三大家都到给妹妹都跟着来牛肉。